Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to the next part in our long little Risk of Rain 2 tier list series that we're doing. And of course, next up we do have the boss tier of items that we're going to cover today. So boss items are generally not the most well-loved. They tend to cover the entire gambit from some of the more meaningless items in the game to some of the more powerful items in the game. But it's very case by case. So starting up, we have Titanic Neural. So Titanic Neural gives you 40 extra health and increases your health regen by, I think it's 1.5 health per second, if I'm not mistaken. It's something similar to that. So Titanic Neural, I think, is a fine item. It's probably going to end up sort of around the tier of like Bungus and Cautious Slug. Because it's honestly very similar to them. It offers consistent health regen, which is very useful on the higher difficulties. I know that on Eclipse 8, regenerating health is effectively not a thing, but I'm talking about for the wider game at large. This can be very effective, especially on characters that have naturally very low health regen, like Molten, or even Loader, for example. Overall, Titanic Neural, though, fairly, it's fine, but it just kind of sits there. It's not a very flashy item. Next up, we have Queen's Gland, Beetle Guard, as I like, or just BGs. This gives you a Beetle Guard that will follow you around and fight things for you. Probably not the most impactful item in the game. I'm probably going to put it right at the top of C tier. I do really like Beetle Gland just because I like having a little Beetle Guard with me. And honestly, that on its own is more than enough for me to, put it up here with the funny items. And it can be more helpful on some survivors than others. For example, I quite like it when I'm playing like Railgunner, just so it's harder for things like Jerboas to sneak up on me. Though on super mobile survivors, it will be hard for the Beetle Guard to keep up with you, so he'll just kind of be lagging around. But it's, he's a funny little guy to have around, and that is in itself worthy of some points. Next up, we have the Aurelionite item. I actually can't remember the name of this one. Aurelionite is pretty solid, pretty similar to Beetle Guard, but I'm probably going to put it a tier up, probably like around these items, just because. Well, actually, no, I'm going to bump it up because she also helps in the final stage of Mithrix. I'll bump it up to maybe like right above, like here, right next to. I feel very similar to it as I do Titanic Neural. Aurelionite is really, she's really solid. She's a huge, beefy bullet sponge. She does pretty solid damage when she hits things. She's got the laser. She's effectively a Stone Titan on your side, but she has the big row of punches, which can be pretty useful. And it's just useful to keep pressure off you, especially if you're running something like Focused Convergence. It's super useful to just have Aurelionite there to take the heat off, so it's easier to stay in your increasingly smaller charge bubble. But she's not gonna, she's not gonna change the world or anything. Next up, we have, Little Disciples. Little Disciples is really solid. Like, really solid. I'm probably going to put it up around here, just because it effectively gives you, almost like a toxic gas cloud that follows you around. If you're unaware of what Little Disciples does, while you're sprinting, it shoots off homing projectiles towards nearby enemies. And they do pretty solid damage. It's like 300% damage, if I'm not mistaken, or it might be even more than that. But it's really useful just for crowd control, keeping yourself safe, and is invaluable when you're escaping a bad situation, just because, when you are running from a big fight, it is often something like a wisp or something hitting you with an attack you didn't expect that could kill you. So having this as that extra benefit and extra way of dealing damage is just generally useful. There's not a survivor it's bad on, but I'm not going to say Little Disciples is going to make your run or anything like that. First up, we have Normal Pearl. So you get this for sacrificing a lunar item to a cleansing pool, which are very rare. And it gives you, 5% health? It's not particularly useful. I suppose it's good if you just need to get rid of a lunar item. It could be a nice benefit. But I'm probably going to put it next to Infusion, because honestly, they're basically the same thing. Normal Pearl isn't very good, though. Irradiant Pearl. Is that what that's called? Iridescent Pearl? Something like that. This item is very good because this gives you the same stat buff, but to all of your stats: damage, movement, speed, all that stuff. And I mean, that's just a very solid. A flat boost to your just base power level is super good, obviously. And I'm not going to say that it's not, because it isn't. This is a very, very solid item, though it is exceedingly hard to get. I believe it's about 1 in 10 chances, or is it 1 in 20? It might be 1 in 20 chances to get this out of a cleansing pool. In fact, I think I've only ever seen it maybe twice. That's because I don't pick up lunar items very often. I'm probably going to put it around like the red utility tier. Just because, it's really solid. It's always on. Molten Perforator. Molten Perforator, I'm putting this up here with the goated damage items. Molten Perforator is really, really good on pretty much every survivor. So long as you get it to proc, it is super good, and it just unleashes a lot of extra damage. And it also looks cool because it shoots off these lava rocks. You get this from the Magma Worm, which is a pretty annoying boss fight. But Magma Perforator, is that what it's called? Because I know the charged one is Charged Perforator, so I presume this is Magma Perforator or something along those lines. It's just a really solid item. When on hit, there's a chance that it just sends out a bunch of explosive rocks that do a lot of damage. Very useful late game, just because of how often you'll be training huge groups of enemies. You can set off a huge chain of Molten Perforators, and it will do a lot of damage. So it's good, and also looks cool. Next up, we have Shatter Spleen. Wait, now that I'm looking at this list... there it is. It's down here. Okay. We have Shatter Spleen, and Shatter Spleen, you get this from Imp Overlord. I'm going to put this right next to, but above, Tri-Tip Dagger. Shatter Spleen is really good. It gives you guaranteed bleed on crits, and bleeding enemies explode. So it effectively is another form of crowd control because of the explosion. Very similar to like Gasoline or Will-O-the-Wisp. And obviously crits guaranteed bleeding is very good. Mainly on rapid attack survivors. Multi, Commando, or Void Fiend, for example. All really love having Shatter Spleen. And even someone like Railgunner, who has guaranteed crits. Wait, did I say Railgunner? Yeah, Railgunner. Has guaranteed crits. Can really appreciate this just because of how bleed works. And Shatter Spleen is just solid. It's extra crowd control and more consistent bleeding, which is really useful, and is something that you can pretty much always count on if you get it. Myard N is okay. It's not the most useful. Basically what it does is, when it activates, it selects a target near you and starts draining for health. You get this from the Clay Dunestrider, which, this is basically its suck attack, but for you. It is a nice bit of extra health regen, very useful on brawler survivors like Acrid or, what's-her-face? Loader, for example, or Buzzsaw. Multi really appreciates this. But I'm probably going to put it down around, I'll bump it up to the bottom of B tier, just because it can be useful if you're low on health and there's just a Beetle running around. You can sap it for a good amount of health. Genesis Loop, is from the Wandering Vagrants, one of the scourges of early game runs. And it effectively gives you their explosive attack, right? When they start to charge up and unleash that big shockwave. It gives that to you when you're below 30% HP. Which is fine. It's not something you can really count on, though it can be a handy little get-out-of-jail card. And when it does go off, it does do a lot of damage, unsurprisingly. But there is a wind-up time to it, right? So once you drop to that health prerequisite, it starts to charge, and then it finally unleashes the attack after, I think it's maybe 3 or 4 seconds, and does a huge shockwave of damage. Overall, pretty solid item, but it's kind of going to go into like this, not necessarily a do-nothing tier, but sort of a, it's an item that doesn't do that much, but it can, at times, be useful. Okay, where are the rest of the gold items? Here we go. So, Charged Perforator, as me and my friends call it, is even better than Molten Perforator. What it does is, instead of sending out the explosive rocks, it calls down the lightning strikes you see from a electric worms, or overloading worms. And it's just more consistent damage, and it's really good. I think it does do a little bit more damage, but I'm not too familiar with it. It's a generally pretty rare item to get, because you, A, need to get deep enough into a run where overloading worms can spawn, and you need to get it to spawn, which is still not guaranteed. And then, not only do you have to kill the thing, which is not necessarily the easiest, that's one of the more powerful enemies in my opinion, but then you have to get lucky on the 15% chance for this to drop. But still, it's a fantastic item. It does a lot of damage. It just helps in general. Anything Molten Perforator does, Charged Perforator does, but better. Planula. So Planula, for the most part, is pretty mediocre. So what it does is when you take damage, you heal for 15 health. This is useful mainly against things like clay Templars, the minigun guys. I always call them gunners. Because they'll be hitting you so rapidly, you'll usually out-heal their damage, though that only works in the early game. And since you can only get this on one stage unless you get a family event, if I'm not mistaken, it's really hard to get Planula, because you have to fight grandparents, which only spawn on the Sky Meadows. Is that what it's called? The purple stage. And I believe they also spawn on Worm Hatchery, Brothers Respite, the new Stage 5. But still, they are not the most common bosses, and then you also have to get lucky on this. I do know that Planula mainly sees use in Hellfire Tincture, which is one of the last builds that I haven't done. I really should try out Hellfire Tincture. But it's very difficult to set up, mainly because you pretty much have a very low chance to get this on every loop you do, and you kind of need it for Hellfire Tincture to work properly. Which means I don't want to put it at the bottom of B tier, but I'm going to put it right around these greens, which are situationally useful. Planula, nothing special. And then, yes. So this is from John Construct, or the G Construct. I just call him John Construct. And this item's awful. It's truly abominable. I'm probably going to put it above Hunter's Harpoon, just because of it doesn't, it can't actively hurt you. But what this does is when you kill an elite, you summon up a Sentinel Construct. Is that what they're called? The triangle guys. I always call them Shungites. It summons one of those. It does a little bit more damage, and it shoots at things for a little while. But it doesn't scale particularly well into the late game, and overall it's just kind of pointless. You have to kill an elite, which in and of itself isn't necessarily the most difficult, but it's not super easy. And you just get a sort of mediocre companion that can't move. So say you just take out an elite on one side of the map, and then one of the teleporters elsewhere. It's not going to help you at all, because the Shungite is just going to sit over there and do nothing for 30 seconds. Yeah, this item sucks. And then we have Gold Scrap, which, Gold Scrap is probably going to go, right beside Radiant Pearl. Just because it's really only use that I can think of, because most gold items you don't really want to stack, is just getting extra perforators. Which, again, you need to get multiple golds that you can scrap, and then get a gold printer that also happens to be one of the perforators, which is not exactly common. I maybe see a gold printer maybe once every 25 runs, and it's usually nothing good. Anyways, I have been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. We covered all the boss items. Oh, wait. Oh, how could I forget? Friendship Cores? That's not it. Duality Cores, I believe is what these are called. This summons up 2 Solus Probes, which are the mini things that Solus control units fart out. And these things are pretty dang good, in my opinion. Great companion items to have. Better than, honestly, Beetle Guard, even Aurelionite. I would still put these guys above her. I'd probably put it right next to Colonel Drone Man. So the way these things work, they have their beam attack, which does, solid damage, but the main thing that really cranks the companion cores to the max is for every ally on your team, they do an additional 100% damage. So they can, if you're running a lot of drones, especially like someone on Captain, they can do a lot of damage very fast. You have to be careful if Mithrix gets them, but that can be true of a lot of items. They're overall super, super useful, and one of my favorite gold items to get. So honestly, should I bump them up? I keep them next to Drone Man. Because they're a little bit situational, right? You do need, like, on their own they're fine, but they generally want some extra help. So that's all the gold items. I hope you enjoyed this part of the tier list. Next up, we're going to do the Lunar items. Then we have the equipments, and finally the Void items. And then we'll be done, and we can move on to something else. I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.